Hi everyone, it's Lauren, and today I'm going to be talking through all of the books that I read in the first half of September. I read a lot of non-fiction actually this month, so might be quite an interesting one. As usual, everything that I mention today is going to be linked in the description box below if you would like to go and read them for yourself. So let's start with an audiobook that I read, which I think was my favourite book actually that I read this month or listened to this month, and that was Losing Earth by Nathaniel Rich. I heard about this book from Sophie at Portal in the Pages' channel. This book is subtitled The Decade We Could Have Stopped Climate Change, and it is a fascinating, terrifying book looking back at climate science and how that has, I suppose, rubbed up against political endeavours over the last 40-50 years. The first chapter looks at what global warming is and what causes it and gives you a little bit of an explanation about what's happening. And then we sort of go back in time and have a chronological history of a lot of specific characters who discovered climate change and all of the different political people such as Al Gore who got involved. And essentially we had so many chances to put climate change, either reverse it or stop it in its tracks so long ago, and there was a lot of public awareness about climate change and the greenhouse effect, and they got so close with the first Bush administration in the early 90s of coming to some kind of global agreement or accord in terms of stopping burning fossil fuels, and nothing happened. And it's fascinating reading it and infuriating reading it, and it's a really interesting look at not just how difficult it is to get governments globally to agree on something because there's no global police and there's nobody, if you don't reach your emissions targets, who's going to tell you off? But then also a look at the fact that all of us have been for so long aware of what we're doing to the planet, and it's only really now that people are starting to go, oh, maybe I should change my lifestyle. The tone of the book itself actually really reminded me of the film The Big Short. I don't know if you've seen that. I know that's based on a book which I haven't read, which is about the people who predicted the financial crisis in 2008. And listening to this book, I was just thinking this needs to be a film. Everybody needs to see this and understand their own complicity in this situation, but also the characters who were basically standing in the way of any kind of emissions targets or reducing the burning of fossil fuels. Next, I picked up this little mini feminist manifesto, Feminism for the 99%, which is written by Cinzia Arruzza, Tithi Bhattacharya and Nancy Fraser. And I saw this on Jean's channel. I know that Jean really enjoyed it, and so I thought, I'll give it a go and see what's going on here. This, although it's a very small book, it's actually quite difficult to read, I would say, if you are new to any kind of feminism. I feel the arguments in this book are, although fundamentally I agree with them, the way it's written, this is pitched quite highly in terms of the vocabulary that it uses and the way it explains things like socialism, capitalism, the patriarchy, feminism, all these different social constructs. I think it really just leaps straight in there and talks in very militant political language, which I don't necessarily disagree with. It is a manifesto after all, and it fulfills its mandate in that sense, but it's not really a very good introduction to these concepts, I don't think. So if you're not really aware of feminism, I wouldn't then start with this, definitely. Having said that, I think overall this is a very good antidote to the sort of Sheryl Sandberg lean-in feminism that you get. A lot of people have previously been talking about feminism just in the context of, white middle-class women getting into boardrooms or doing well in their job and individual women doing well. And this book argues that if you are really a feminist, you need to be fighting for the 99% of women globally. So that includes things like being anti-capitalist. There's also interesting things in here about being environmentally friendly, because a lot of the people who are most affected by climate change are people in sort of the global south. So there's a lot of good stuff in here, and a lot of their arguments I do really agree with, but I'm not sure if this book really successfully achieves its aims in terms of you're just convincing me, somebody who already believes this. I don't think it's very good at convincing somebody who hasn't thought these thoughts already or isn't already really involved in feminism. Now let's talk about a book I really didn't like, and that is How to Be a Woman by Moran. So there's a lot of feminist books that I've been reading recently, and that's because I am going to be doing a feminist book recommendations video very shortly, where I give you recommendations depending on how familiar you are with feminism or gender studies or anything. There should be a book for anybody, depending on what you want to learn about. So I kind of picked this up in the name of research because I hadn't read it. I bought it a long while ago. This came out in, I'm probably going to get this wrong, I want to say like 2010, maybe, something like that. I think in the years that have followed this book's publication, I feel like we've actually moved on even more, and I think the criticisms that I heard at the time are even more valid now. I don't want to rant too much about this book, she says before going into a full-blown rant, because I feel like for lots of people this was actually a really good window into feminism and like thinking about sexism in ways that perhaps they hadn't before. And I think there is a lot of value in books like that, especially if it's something that's introducing you to these topics for the very first time. So I don't want to take anything away from this book in that sense. However, this really is a book pretending to be about feminism and sexism, and really it's just a book about Caitlin Moran and her crazy life growing up. So I think I will start this off by saying I don't think I really warmed to her writing in general. So if you like her writing that she's done in columns, that you're obviously going to enjoy this book more than I do. For me, there's just so much shouting, there's so much all capitals like all the time, and so much use of like stupid language, either swearing or using really silly over-the-top crazy words for things, which just rubbed me up the wrong way a little bit. But the thing that really was the last straw for me in this book, and which is the reason I put it down, is that it's just so many ill-formed, unformed thoughts that Caitlin Moran just has, and she's just spouting things without really thinking them through, without really researching what other people think on a topic, and just saying, this is what I think, so therefore that's correct. And that's not to say that some of the things she thinks aren't good. Sometimes I laughed, and sometimes I found what she says quite useful. There's a quote in here, which I have heard before, where she talks about how to identify whether something is sexist, and she says the method she has for that is to say, well, are men worrying about this? Like, for an example, like really long queues for the toilet, that's something that women have to worry about, but men don't have to worry about that, so therefore it's sexist. That's how you're kind of thinking about, you know, shaving your legs. Men don't ever have to worry about that, and that's actually quite a useful metric, I think, especially for someone who's sort of new to thinking about sexism. It's like, oh yeah, hey, like I have to worry about this and men don't. But then she uses that to justify her next comment, which is, and that's when I decided I was against the burqa. And it's like, oh, okay, Caitlin, are you? Good. I'm glad a white British woman is against the burqa. Like, what are you talking about? And her thoughts continue to fly at you in that way. She has a whole chapter where she talks about how you shouldn't wax your bikini line at all, but it is okay to shave your arms and shave your legs. Just because she likes to do that, and therefore that's the standard that everybody, all women everywhere, should be conforming to. There are so many times that she talks about different issues that women have to deal with, and instead of just talking about how complicated it is, she just says, well, therefore, if you're that kind of woman, you're letting the rest of the sisterhood down by doing this. You should be doing that. She has another chapter where she talks about how stripping is bad, but doing pole exercise and burlesque is not bad. Like, what are you talking about? It's just thoughts she has in her head. She's not examined them in any way. She's just assumed that she is right and then flinging it at the rest of the world. The way I've summed this book up to everybody is basically Caitlin Moran is looking at stereotypes of women and going, that's so bad that women are stereotyped like that. Women aren't like that. Oh my God, women are all like me. Haven't you heard? It's full of contradictions. It's full of like her being rude and racist and ableist. Like, there's just so much wrong with it, which is a shame, because I do think some of the things she says could be useful for people, but it's just too much. I'm just putting this book down now because I'm going to give myself a heart attack even talking about it anymore. So let's finish off with a book which actually could be a little bit controversial itself, but I think I've just used up all my energy on how to be a woman, but that is Betraying Big Brother by Lita Hong-Fincher. And Lita Hong-Fincher wrote Leftover Women, which I read, I want to say last year, or maybe 2 years ago actually. It was a pick for Jean's Feminist Orchestra when she originally did that book club. And that was about sort of the Chinese government's propaganda against women to marry as soon as possible, and if they get to the age of 28 and they're unmarried and they're leftover women. It talks about how in Chinese society women are encouraged to give all of their life savings to buy a house, but then only put their husband's name on the house, so they don't actually have any legal property. And that was a really good book, and it had so many interviews with different Chinese women, which I found really fascinating. This is her follow-up book, and it's focusing on the detention of 5 feminist activists back in, I think, 2016, who were imprisoned by the government and subjected to basically psychological torture, all for just handing out stickers to members of the public which campaigned against sexual harassment. So we hear about these 5 women's experiences, also other women who have been involved in feminist activism, and it also talks about how difficult it is to have any kind of feminist network in China because of the censorship, because of the fact that the communist government is probably more leaning towards a paternalistic government, in which case they don't really want women's equality to come up, but also they don't really want any kind of protest, let's be honest. So it's very difficult to talk about things even such as like domestic violence. I think there was a lot of interesting things in here. I think for me these chapters jumped around a lot, and you sort of got people's backstories at funny points, and sometimes they'd repeat things and in a different chapter reintroduce you to someone, which I felt like I've already read about them in chapter 2. So I think, although there's some really good stuff in here, and what I also really liked actually is it talked about how feminism and equality between men and women has historically been a larger part of Chinese society, especially in the original communist uprising. But then once they're in power, they try to sort of get rid of it. So it's looking at how women have been fighting for equality in China for a very long time, which is an aspect of it I liked. But I do think this is I didn't find it very easy to read, I guess. Not as easy to read as Leftover Women. So that's my September so far. I hope you've all been reading some really good stuff. I'd love to talk to you about these books in the comments, as I always do. But also let me know what you've been reading recently, and I will see you next time. Bye.